A couple days ago, I put up a video comparing the visual presentation and fidelity of Monster Hunter Wilds with Monster Hunter World, sprouting out from an argument made pre-launch that Wilds looks worse than World, which to me is just demonstrable lunacy, frankly, as I think my video proved, without the shadow of a doubt. So, in this video, as I'm sure the title and thumbnail has clued you in on already, we're comparing the most recent Monster Hunter game, that would be Rise, to Wilds. Not because I think it's an especially useful thing to do, but mainly because I think it's kind of interesting to compare their notably different artistic presentations and their stylistic choices, especially as it's a fact that both games, believe it or not, despite their obvious differences, actually do run on the exact same game engine, Capcom's in-house IRI engine. In fact, Rise was the first Monster Hunter game to do so. Also, I'm just kind of doing it for poops and giggles, frankly. But I do, honestly, think that Rise and its expansion Sunbreak do look fantastic, largely due to the wonderful and charming stylistic choices, if not the general fidelity of their worlds, compared to many other modern games, certainly. We are, of course, looking at the PC version of Rise for this comparison, much like I did for my World versus Wilds video. It only makes sense to compare each game running at the absolute best it can look. So like with that other video, both games are running completely maxed out, everything turned up and on, except for motion blur. We're running at native 4K, no upscaling, no frame gen, no malarkey, and with both running their optional high-res texture packs. It's no secret that Monster Hunter World was where a massively significant number of players first experienced this now 21-year-old series, certainly first fell in love with it. People who then became an ongoing part of the fan base for Monster Hunter, colloquially known as the Fifth Fleeters. And I was among them. Hello again, I am Blunty, by the way. Don't think I said that yet, did I? Pretty deep in the video to introduce myself. Whoops. And I mean, technically, Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate was the first Monster Hunter game I played, but I never actually owned it, and World was the one where I played for an extended period of time, and the one that actually hooked me very deeply into the series. World was, in fact, a significant departure in quite a lot of ways from many things, both visually and mechanically, from the games that preceded it. And while a lot of veterans had a lot to say about these changes, and quite a lot of it was not favourable in the beginning, as happens with any new entry into any long-running series, certainly Monster Hunter, it happens every single time a new game comes out. There's these arguments about, well, the new one's not as good, and for this and this and this. But obviously World went on to become a massive hit, Capcom's best-selling game of all time, but Monster Hunter Wilds is on pace to obliterate that record, pretty easily, by the way, even while it too is being heavily criticised by people who came on board with earlier games, even with what true veteran players might derisively call world babies. And when it came out, Monster Hunter Rise was also criticised for many things. Its vastly zippier combat pacing was unwelcome for many people, I guess. Its crazier, more anime-like movesets were derided. People were upset because it had a quote-unquote more arcadey feel, as nebulous and usefulness as that is for an adjective. Especially if you're like me and you grew up with, actual arcade games and actual video game arcades. And I don't mean the ones with tickets and crap, I mean back, video games. Proper ones. Excuse me, I've got to have an old man grumble. But certainly it was perceived as a significant visual downgrade from World, especially by those Fifth Fleeters who didn't know any better, and it was far more stylized from the ground up. But in that way, it actually far more closely resembled the older games than World ever did. Like I said, World was a departure. Rise was something of a return to classic Monster Hunter in many ways, in fact. Again, something that many world babies, as it were, failed to really understand and were mocked by veterans for, frankly. But a lot of people did consider it like a step backwards in some ways. And I kind of felt bad for these people, just writing off this game based on its looks and assumptions about it, and they never gave it a fair go, because it is a mad fun game to actually play. Like, really, really, really fun. But also, of course, because it was born as a Nintendo Switch exclusive designed specifically for that system, which limited its presentation, naturally. Only later, after proving to be a highly successful and enthusiastically received popular game among players, it got ports to PC, and later again to PlayStation and Xbox. The Switch version was criticized for looking a little mushy, running as it did on the low-power console at an internal resolution of 1344 by 756 before being output at 1080p. That was in its docked mode. If you ran handheld, you were looking at it in 960 by 540, upscaled, of course, to the 720p screen. But it did at least do both of these things at a nearly perfect lock at 30 FPS, so the performance was extremely consistent, and that was welcome. So even when the PC, Xbox and PlayStation versions arrived, being ports of a Nintendo Switch game, though they obviously ran at higher resolutions and much better frame rates, the game itself still looked a little quote-unquote last gen, I guess. Certainly by the standards of other games on those systems. But I don't know, man. Personally, I think there's an argument to be had that in some ways Rise looks better than Wilds. Obviously not in detail or fidelity or complexity or density of its environments or any of that sort of stuff. That would be insane to suggest. But I do feel like it has more personality, more style, more individual charm. It has a look of its own that feels more iconic. While Wilds is a little more adventurous in its look than the, in my opinion, too quote-unquote grounded representation of World, which was kind of a little bit drained of color, kind of muddy, and didn't have a lot of personality in its presentation. I think I personally prefer Monster Hunter with less of an eye towards quote-unquote realistic presentations and more heavily leaning on style. And that is, of course, without even talking about the significant difference in feel to general combat. I go back and forth on what I prefer more, the slow, deliberate, heavy, grounded stuff of Wilds and indeed World, or the sort of crazy anime-style, flippity-doo, crazy stuff of Risebreak. Both have their merits, and I don't know if I can ever decide which one I like better. I'm glad both exist. Like in one series, I'm so glad we have two so vastly different approaches. We keep sort of flip-flopping between generation to generation. You have one game that's a little more serious, and it takes itself a little bit more serious, and you'll have the next game which just goes nuts and gets experimental with stuff. I think it's fantastic that we get that, because so many long-running game series sort of lock into one thing and just stick with that until it dries up and dies. I love that the Capcom keep letting this game series evolve and not get stale. I did always wish, though, and frankly still do, that with Rise they would have brought in ray tracing, at least for the PC port, of course, because there's so many environments that look great, but would look amazing with ray traced, at the very least ray traced reflections, if not, the rest of it, especially in the icy and volcanic areas. Oh man, they would look fantastic with ray tracing. Oh well. In any case, I'll let the rest of the shots run for you here. Hopefully in the comments of this one, more of you will actually understand what I'm trying to show here and not just leave comments whining about how Wilds looks worse if you run it at lower settings, if you don't have a machine good enough to run it at max, as if that makes a useful point. I mean, it's kind of like saying to someone, hey, dude, I mean, yeah, sure, that lasagna you made is super tasty and that might be the best tasting lasagna in the world, but did you know that if you can't cook well and if you don't cook it properly, lasagna tastes worse? I mean, yeah, doy, that's why I'm comparing the games maxed out. So we're looking at the games in their best possible presentation. It would be silly to put one game at max and one game on medium settings and then compare them and go, well, this is the reality. It's just crazy to me that people keep coming back to that. Anyway, feel free to have a chat in the down below about the sort of differences between Rise's approach and World/Wild's approach to Monster Hunter, which one you prefer and why. I think it's a really interesting topic. Thanks for watching. I'm Blunty. Catch you next time. Thank you to the patrons, and I'll catch you next time.